Hello, my name is Melissa Johnson, and I'm the one-stop operator for Southeast Kansas Works. Welcome to Interviewing to Impress. Today we're going to be touching on interview do's and don'ts. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the different types of questions that you might encounter during the interview. We'll talk about the importance of following up after the interview, and we'll also give you some access to additional resources that are going to help you nail that next interview. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, there's some common mistakes that you want to avoid so you can make a great first impression. Let's talk about some of those interview do's and don'ts. Do arrive early and make sure that you're well rested. You also want to make sure that you're demonstrating confident posture and positive body language. So no slouching back in your chair or crossing your arms. Make sure that you're seated straight and that your back is straight. Maybe even lean forward just a little bit and smile. Now, we do understand that you've probably already submitted your resume when you applied for the job, but that doesn't mean that the person that you're interviewing with has access to that resume. So it's always a good idea to bring a couple extra copies of your resume and your references. You want to dress for success, and you want to do your research ahead of time. We always say that it's a good idea to dress equal to or slightly above the people who are currently employed at the organization. You always want to make sure that you're demonstrating appropriate manners, saying yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and be prepared to ask a few relevant questions at the end of the interview. Now, some of the things that you want to avoid are checking your cell phone or texting during the interview. Now, if you're like me and you have one of those smart watches that's connected to your phone, you want to make sure that that's not a distraction for you either. Keep that cell phone silenced and put away, and avoid the temptation to look down at your watch when a message comes through. Try not to overshare or ramble during the interview. Now, this is something that happens more often than you would think. There's naturally going to be some uncomfortable silences between your last answer and the next question, but it's okay to sit quietly while they're jotting down their notes and preparing to ask you the next question. Do whatever you can to avoid wanting to fill that awkward silence. Never exaggerate your qualifications, but also don't just stick to the script. Now, what we mean by that is you want to think of your resume as the basic script that kind of highlights some of your previous work experience. But if all you're doing is sticking to what's written on the resume, then what's the point of the interview? Instead, the interview is an opportunity for you to elaborate, expand upon your experience, but always making sure that you're not over-exaggerating. Now, we've talked about the importance of dressing neatly, but we also want to say don't skip your hygiene routine. Make sure that if you're going to put on nice, fresh clothing, that you're putting them on a clean body. So make sure you're showering and washing your hair before that interview. Have you ever heard the phrase, you never get a second chance to make a great first impression? Well, at Kansas Works, we believe that to be very true. Your interview begins as soon as you arrive. And we don't mean as soon as you arrive into the office to sit down and start that interview. We mean as soon as you pull into the parking lot. We've heard from employers that it's a real turnoff when they see customers getting out of the car that are tucking in their shirt or maybe picking up trash that fell out of their car, or someone who's standing outside of the office and taking a smoke break before they come in for the interview. So make sure that you are already dressed for success, that your shirt's tucked in, and that you arrive, maybe 10 to 15 minutes early. It's a good idea to arrive a few minutes early because if their interview rotation is going faster than expected, they might actually call you in a few minutes early. I'd say 10 to 15 minutes is a good rule of thumb. Make sure you've got those resumes and references as we talked about beforehand. And a firm handshake, maintaining eye contact, and smiling goes a long way to making a great first impression. Now let's touch on the 30-second elevator speech. Why do they call it an elevator speech and why do they say 30 seconds? Well, let me tell you why. 30 seconds is about the amount of time it would take a person to ride from the top to the bottom floor of a building in an elevator. And so you have a very limited amount of time to introduce yourself. When you have your 30-second elevator speech prepared, you should be covering things like who you are, what business or field that you're involved in, what makes you different from the competition, and how will the employer benefit from hiring you. So here's an example of a 30-second elevator speech. My name is Melissa Johnson, and I have 30 years experience in customer service in the business-to-business industries, hospitality industry, and also human services industry. My experience spans from being a case manager to also being a supervisor, and then also maintaining relationships with businesses and partners within the workforce development industry. I can bring quite a few things to the table, including being flexible and having the ability to both work one-on-one with customers, oversee staff, and also work with our partners. Now let's touch on the different types of interview questions that you might encounter during an interview. There are traditional interview questions and behavioral interview questions. Those traditional interview questions are straightforward questions that require straightforward answers. Things like, what is your greatest strength? Or tell me about your weakness. Or what we just covered, tell me about yourself. On the other hand, we have behavioral interview questions that are really designed to assess your employability skills. And they really need you to be more specific about examples of real world experiences that you've had in your professional work field. So some of those behavioral questions might be things like, tell me about a time you had to meet a tight deadline, or describe a time that you failed. So when you're answering those behavioral questions, it might take you a couple of minutes to formalize your response so you can provide them with a specific example based on your previous work history. Now, we like to recommend using the STAR method when you're answering those behavioral interview questions. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. Now, the situation or task is going to be when you're describing the specific situation or the specific task that you had at work, the actions that you took to resolve that situation or achieve that goal, and then the result. What was the outcome of that situation? So if someone were to ask you, tell me about a time when you had a difficult customer and how you were able to assist them, a good response might be, well, during the pandemic, our offices were closed for a period of time, but we still had customers that were needing to access computers for their job search purposes or also for filing for unemployment benefits. Since our office was closed, customers weren't able to come into the workforce center to use our computers, but our management team had developed a laptop loan program that allowed us to provide laptops to our customers. So I had a customer who I was speaking with on the phone who was very upset about not being able to come into the workforce center. And I was able to let them express their frustrations. And once they finished expressing their frustrations, I let them know that with a Kansas Works account, we would be happy to meet them and loan them a laptop for use for 2 weeks. Now, that customer was very happy that we were able to provide them with that laptop, and it helped them to not only file for their unemployment benefits, but also to conduct job search so they could get back to work in a timely fashion. Okay, so we've talked about preparing for the interview, and we've also talked about some of those types of questions that you're going to have during the interview. Now let's recap what to do in that interview. As we mentioned before, make sure that that phone is silenced and do not check it no matter what. Be conscious of that body language and also your volume and gestures. Now, if you're like me, I talk a lot with my hands. So it might be important for you just to place your hands on your knees to be more aware that you're not talking too much with those hands. Some people also have the habit of swinging back and forth in their chair. So if you can plant both feet firmly on the ground, that'll keep you mindful of not doing so. Now remember, the interview goes 2 ways. You're going to be nervous, and that's okay. But take a deep breath, calm your nerves, and make sure that you're presenting yourself in a poised and positive manner. If you're poised and positive and calm, then the interviewer is going to in turn be poised and positive and calm. Demonstrate enthusiasm and interest for the job or the company. And that's where that research ahead of time can come in. Make sure that you're building rapport with the interviewers. And it's okay to take time to reflect about the questions and the answers before you actually answer. So if you're encountered with a question and you don't really know what to say, you might say something along the lines of, "That's a great question. Let me think about that for just a moment." And then you can think formalize your response, and then you can respond truthfully and honestly. We talked about this earlier. You can share your professional story, but don't overshare. And make sure that you are prepared with some smart and thoughtful questions to ask during the interview. So one of the things that you'll want to do is prepare a couple of questions and make sure you have those written down on a notepad that you take into the interview. When you get to the end of the interview and they've asked you all of the questions, most of the times they're going to say, "What questions do you have for us?" Now you can refer back to your list, and you might find that some of the questions you had listed, you've already gotten those answers just through the course of the interview. So as you're going down the list, you might say, "Okay, you've already answered this question for me. Oh, here's one. How soon will you be making a decision?" Now, another question that you might ask is, how would I be trained or introduced to the job? There are some questions that you do want to avoid, however. Do not ask questions about salaries or benefits. Those questions can come later during the offer stage. You'll have the opportunity to negotiate on salary and benefits and all of those things, but at the end of the interview, it's not appropriate unless they bring it up or unless they're making the offer on the spot. Okay. So you've prepared for the interview, you've got plenty of rest the night before, you've dressed for success, and you've nailed those behavioral interview questions. What's next? Well, we think what's next is sending a thank you. Now, that thank you letter can be in the form of a thank you email, or you can send it old school snail mail. But the important thing to remember is you need to follow up with a thank you within 24 hours of your interview. There's a few things you want to make sure you cover in that thank you note or that thank you email. A brief recap about the encounter. Thank them for taking the time to interview you. If there's anything that you think is really important for them to know, but maybe you forgot to mention during the interview, the thank you letter is a good time to add that. Make sure you're also including your contact information for future follow-up. Now, we also think that it's okay and appropriate for you to follow up a few days later to inquire about their decision. A good rule of thumb is to wait 48 to 72 hours before you follow up. But if you've asked them during the interview, how soon do you think you're going to be making a decision, and they tell you a week, then you're going to want to wait a week. If they tell you we're going to be making this decision within the next 24 hours, then you really want to make sure you're following up with them the next day. We hope this information has been helpful, but we do understand you might feel like you need a little bit more practice, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. So we would encourage you to visit your local workforce center. You can schedule a time to come in and we can do some mock interview practices with you. And we also encourage you to do some mock interview practice on your own with your friends and family. You can visit kansasworks.com, go to the job seeker page and see a list of additional resources that can help you prepare for your next interview. And you can also access the Big Interview platform, which is available to anyone that has a KansasWorks registration. So after you've created a job seeker account on kansasworks.com, you can access Big Interview. And it's basically like an artificial intelligence or online interview practice. They'll ask you a series of questions and you can record your answers. And then the Big Interview will score you on your answers to let you know what you did right and what you need to work on. Now, you can scan this QR code to go to our website, which is sekworks.org, to find out more information about our hours of operation and our workforce center locations. You can even schedule a virtual appointment online. We have 5 workforce centers in the Southeast Kansas area. Full-time offices are in Chanute, Emporia, Independence, Paola, and Pittsburgh. We also have 2 satellite locations that are available by appointment only, and those are in Iola and Fort Scott. Our normal hours of operation are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and we close daily from 1 to 2 for our lunch break. Now, on Thursdays, we open at 9, and that allows us to have our weekly staff meetings from 8 to 9. Finally, we encourage you to follow us on social media so you can stay up to date about job fairs, hiring events, and hot jobs in the area. We also will provide tips on our social media platforms to help you be better prepared for your job search. You can also download the KansasWorks Job Search app so you have job search access available on your phone 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Any questions?